President Lee Jae Myung is back home on this Monday from his five-nation tour, which came to a close with a summit in Argentina and a meeting with the Korean community in Germany. With more press perspective today. Hello and welcome to Monday's edition of Press Perspective for August 3rd. I'm Min Sun-hee. President Lee Jae Myung has wrapped up a three-nation tour of Latin America with stops in Brazil, Chile and Argentina before concluding his trip with a visit to the Korean community in Germany. Today we assess the diplomatic gains, the regional significance of Seoul's growing engagement with Latin America and what this overseas tour reveals about the Lee Jae Myung administration's broader foreign policy priorities. For this, I have Fabian Kretschmer with German news agency DPA here in the studio. Fabian, welcome back.
Great to be back here.
I also have Celio Fioretti with French daily Le Croix. Celio, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Fabian, let's begin in Argentina. What would you say were the greatest outcomes of the summit there?
Well, it was quite an event. I think the first time in 22 years that a Korean president traveled and visited Argentina. I give you three major outcomes, and I think the most important right away, that's critical minerals. Argentina has a lot of lithium and copper reserves, and that's exactly what South Korea needs. So both countries agreed that they would deepen cooperation on lithium and copper supply chains. That also includes cooperation on exploration and mining. And this is a good example how complementary those two economies work. I mean, Argentina has the resources. South Korea needs them for batteries, for semiconductors. And Argentina, on the other hand, needs technology, investment capital to really source those minerals. So I think it's win-win. We have that. Then the energy cooperation goes beyond that. There was an agreement that South Korea from next year on will import crude oil from Argentina. That, of course, is important right now. South Korea has an interest to diversify its energy supply chains. Argentina can help. And maybe the third point is both sides agreed on a double taxation agreement. And that actually might sound very, kind of bureaucratic, but actually it is important because this is the major hurdle when Korean companies want to enter the Argentinian market. Like if they have a double taxation agreement, that really helps because then the profits of a company will only be taxed by one side, and that is basically a major incentive to get more investment. So I think Argentina and South Korea, they really have a win-win situation here.
Right. Celia, the Argentine media closely followed this visit, of course. How was President Lee Jae Myung's visit there received, and what aspects of the trip appeared to attract the most attention, do you think?
Well, indeed, Argentine media gave this visit a heavy, largely positive coverage on the diplomatic and economic front. But there was also it sparked a lot of debate in Argentina. Mainstream outlets like La Nación emphasized the historic weight of the trip. The first, as my colleague Fabian said, the first trip by a Korean president in 22 years in Argentina. It was framed almost ceremonially with detailed coverage of the delegation, the foreign minister's involvement, and Javier Milei also personally praising Korea for its outstanding economic success, and also Korea also congratulates Javier Milei for stopping the inflation or limiting it at least, and also there's this new incentive regime that Fabian said that will probably indeed help Korean to make a lot of more investment in the country, and those concrete deliverable, the lithium value chain, crude oil imports starting next year, and a joint working group got a lot of attention in media in Argentina. All the coverage was not only celebratory. There were some more like critical aspect of it because Milei has a really aggressive fiscal policy, and with those incentives, some critics in Argentina were worried that a country like Korea got rich because of a good planning, a smart managing of its resource, and they criticized that maybe Argentina is not doing that well. They should take more inspiration from Korea. There was a lot of critique on that side, but overall, Argentinian media still favor well the coming of Lee Jae Myung to Argentina, with a lot of enthusiasm and a renewed strategic ties between the two countries that will probably skip the skepticism that we've seen in some media.
Right. Fabian, the Lee Jae Myung administration's diplomacy, it's often been described as pragmatic. Did this visit to Argentina reinforce that reputation, or did you come away with a different impression?
No, I would say this state visit was no exemption. It underlined Lee Jae Myung's pragmatic approach. I mean, if you look at his foreign policy, his diplomatic approach, I mean, he wants to get along with Donald Trump, of course, the US president. He also wants to improve ties with Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. He gets along quite well with Sun-hee Takaichi, the Japanese prime minister. He wants to engage with North Korea. So he has a lot of facets and like basically wants to please everyone, if I may say so. And with Milei, it's not a secret that both have different political perspectives on things. I mean, Milei is a neoliberal. He has quite radical views on the economy. He wants to have a very slim state and no regulations and all that. And Lee Jae Myung, on the other side, I mean, he's also for like a pro-welfare state and workers' rights and so on. So I'm sure that if they would talk about political things, those two persons, they would maybe clash. But during this state visit, I mean, it was all smiles. You can see that actually on this one photo when Milei held his like golden chainsaw, the symbol of like eradicating bureaucracy, and Lee Jae Myung was also like holding it with his one hand and smiling. So he basically puts the national interest and pragmatic interests first, and mostly that is economic interests, and ideology doesn't really matter that much. He tries to get along with head of states as long as there's something to benefit for the South Korean economy.
Right. Celio, one interesting takeaway, according to pundits here in the country, from this trip, of course, is South Korea's growing focus on South America. Is South Korea simply looking to expand its economic footprint there, or do you see a broader shift perhaps in its global diplomatic priorities?
I would say it's both, actually. On the surface, this is clearly about economics. Lee Jae Myung stopped in Brazil, in Chile, and now in Argentina, and it was all centered on strategic resources, critical minerals, technology, and trade. Chile and Argentina sits on a huge lithium reserve that Korean battery EV vehicles need, and the push to revive the Korea-Mercosur agreement also was a big stake in this trip. It shows that Seoul wants really to get something, an economical benefit from Latin America. But if you look at the timing and the framing of this visit, also there's I would say a bigger story to it. The trip comes right after the EU-Mercosur agreement, which proved the bloc can strike a major alliances. Korea is essentially racing to be not to be left out actually in the competition against maybe Canada and Singapore, as Mercosur try to diversify this partnership. So Korea tried to come there, and it's not just diplomacy, it's commerce. And there's also a symbolic layer. This is the first, as we said, the first presidential visit to Argentina in 22 years. And that signal that Seoul is really trying to diversify also the people it's reaching out to, not only centered on Asia and maybe Europe or North America, but also trying to reach out to new population, new markets, new countries that might have some good potential for good relationship with Korea. And we know also the Korean culture is really big in South America, so there's a lot of room to play with, and I'm sure there will be more in the future, more connection between Korea and South America.
Fabian, if you compare Argentina with President Lee Jae Myung's earlier stops in Brazil and Chile, which country do you suppose offered South Korea the greatest strategic payoff, if you will?
Well, it's a tough question, because if you ask me what is the long-term benefit with the biggest potential, I would choose a different country, namely Brazil. But if you look at the present, then I would say Chile has the most to offer. Why Chile has so many reserves in terms of lithium, copper? the world's biggest resources in many critical minerals, and that's exactly what the South Korean economy needs now. You have a big AI boom, a big chip production, and to keep that going, to sustain that, and also to make the vision come true that Lee Jae Myung has to make South Korea an AI powerhouse, a digital country that nobody can basically shy away from. Then those minerals are the most important, and this is exactly what Chile has to offer and what South Korea needs.
Right. Celio, what's your take? Which Latin American country delivered the greatest diplomatic value, if you will, for South Korea?
Well, I see Fabian's point out, but for me, I would say it's more Brazil. Of course, Brazil has a lot to offer, great beaches, caipirinhas, but also it's a big economical importance in the world, and not only in South America. Brazil is not just another stop, it's the anchor of Mercosur, and when Lee Jae Myung met with Lula in Brasilia, the agreement to revive the negotiation between the two was dormant since 2018, and now they're trying to push forward, and it will allow Korea to enter a huge market, and Brazil is the entry gate to that market in the South America. It's not just a bilateral deal. It's by opening that door, you open a market to Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Chile, Argentina. So it will represent a lot of opportunities for the Korean economy. And there's also the scale to consider. Brazil is South America's largest economy and its most influential voice in the region. So by reactivating those links between Brasilia and Seoul, it's also opening the door not only for commerce, not only for trade, but also for a broader diplomacy in the region, imposing Korea's importance and role in the region. So I would say Brazil is the entry gate for a lot of opportunities for Korea, and that's why it was probably the most important deal to have.
Right. Meanwhile, Fabian, before returning home on this Monday, President Lee Jae Myung stopped by Frankfurt to meet with members of the Korean community there. What message do you suppose is the Lee Jae Myung administration trying to send by including that particular event at the end of this latest diplomatic tour?
Yeah, it's not so unusual for Lee Jae Myung to visit the Korean diaspora in many countries. He often does this during his state visits. Why did he do that in Frankfurt? I mean, one of the largest communities, Korean communities in Europe, is living in Frankfurt. You have also a lot of Korean companies. Their European headquarters are located there. And I mean, this year is a special year for Korea-German relations. 60 years ago, the first nurses from Korea were sent to Germany. They worked there in the healthcare system, and I think it's important to remember their stories because they contributed a lot to the economic development back in South Korea, because basically what they earned was foreign currency that was needed to build up the country. And also their stories, I mean, that was not really all roses. At that time, Germany was a really conservative place. There were not many foreigners, so a lot of those Korean women at that time also felt lonely. There was some discrimination. Some then managed to settle down, and what they did is they start to build trust and bridges, and this is what Lee Jae Myung basically wanted to remember. And he basically says, like, we see you, we help you, like even the diaspora in the second generation, third generation. And that is quite interesting because he basically sees Korean identity by ethnicity, not so much by passport, but he also wants to reach out to the diaspora who sometimes already have German passports and live there for a long time. But yeah, I think that's his approach. He wants to have a human-centered diplomacy.
Right, and staying with this, Celio, broadly speaking, why are overseas Korean communities becoming a more visible part of the presidential diplomacy, do you think?
I would say there's a few things converging here. First, it's practical. It's a trip that touched 5 countries and multiple diaspora meeting, Argentina, Germany, like others along the way. That's not accidental scheduling. Overseas Korean community function as a ready-made network, a sort of grassroots movement. You have business owners, engineers, academics who already understand both Korea and their host countries. And meeting them is not just a symbolic outreach just to be nice with the Korean overseas community. It's tapping people who can actually help Korea's ambition in those countries because they know well how it works, and they can jumpstart this movement to open new companies, to open the door to new opportunities, and whether that's lithium partnership in Argentina or semiconductor ties with Germany, they can really help that. And second, there's also a political logic. Lee Jae Myung explicitly framed this as a new era of cooperation. So the AI revolution, changing global supply chain, diasporic communities become kind of a living proof to look, we already have people embedded a bit everywhere, and they can help us again with that. It's not a relationship starting from zero. We already have ties, whether it's Germany, way back in the days, so it feels more grounded. There's more something more tangible for both countries to work on. And third, it's also about soft power and domestic optics. I would say presidential visit to diaspora communities generate this like warm and personal image also. So it's never bad to visit them. And it's also plays into that also sentimental value of our people abroad, and that really reinforced the narrative that Korea today is not just a small isolated country. It reaches out to a lot of people, a lot of places in the world, and Koreans now are known also everywhere in the world.
Right, indeed. Fabian, Celio just mentioned soft power. And while covering the president's trip to South America last week, we had the pleasure here on Press Perspective to speak to quite a number of journalists stationed in South America about the president's trip. Quite a number of them spoke about the role of soft power in further perhaps promoting the Lee Jae Myung administration's diplomatic and economic interests in Latin America, keeping in mind, of course, the BTS concert in Chile, Brazil, I believe also in Argentina in October. What do you suppose has been the role of soft power in promoting the Lee Jae Myung administration's diplomatic agenda?
Well, soft power is really the key feature of South Korea's, I would say, export strategy. I mean, that's basically the wave that everything is riding on. I would go so far as to say that without the popularity of K-pop, of K-drama, I think we wouldn't see so many cosmetic products being so successful. I think even companies who produce chips or who produce food, I think they also benefit just by Korea having a more positive reputation. And I mean, now it's basically a given that South Korea is a hip nation, like a very popular nation, pop culture nation. But if you go back to the 1980s or 1990s, it was really quite different. If you talk to people back then, I mean, South Korea, I mean, was not so well known. I mean, people knew, okay, there's like North and South Korea, there's a separation. They knew that, okay, it's a high-tech nation that's starting to emerge, but it was more like a nerdy nation, and now it's cool, and that's quite a transformation. And I mean, in the beginning, the focus was more on soft power here in the region in East Asia, but I think the South American market has been really the hot thing as of lately, especially BTS, etc. They're really eyeing the South American market. I mean, of course, because it's popular already, but I think there's a lot of people, a lot of young people, and yeah, I think K-pop touches something in the youth nowadays. So in Germany we have the word the Zeitgeist. Like, I think there's something that is very universal. So K-pop doesn't only work here in the region; it works as well in the West, in South America, and basically it's a global phenomenon.
All right, and speaking about this global phenomenon, we have time for perhaps one more question. Celio, I wondered, there's been quite a bit of media coverage here in South Korea about a growing number of French students here in the country. How do you explain that phenomenon?
I would say it's the conclusion of a lot of attraction for Asia, for French people. It started way long ago with Japan, and people were really interested in Japan. And now, since also the Hallyu, the Korean wave, whether it's Korean movies, Korean drama, K-pop, also people turn their attention more to Korea. And it's true that in 4 years I've been here, I've met tons and tons of French people. I sometimes feel like I'm in Paris and not even in Seoul. But it really, a lot of people come, and mostly it's young people actually. They come to study in university because they want to try maybe to see how the life is in Korea, and the gateway for that is doing an exchange program in different universities in Seoul. And you see them, and sometimes they fell in love in the countries, they want to stay, they want to, maybe they found a family or something. And really, I would say France is probably the biggest consumers of Korean cultural products in Europe, so that explains why we see so many French people getting interested in coming to Korea these days.
Right, and that is great to know, of course. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Celio, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. Fabian, thank you very much for your insights. Right, meanwhile, pundits here say this latest presidential trip centered on trade and resources ultimately delivered a broader message. South Korea is seeking new partnerships and a larger voice in global affairs. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow. That's Tuesday for more panel discussion.